Around 8 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Patrick and Kelsey. Kelsey was a good friend of mine, while Patrick was a good friend of Kelsey's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 15 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Patrick's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Kelsey's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up, confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Kelsey had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Kaylee. I'm here to see Kelsey." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening. Besides having random customers over to grab weed, Kelsey would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom, "Hi, I'm here to see Kelsey." I replied, "Okay, he's here. Just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Kaylee girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken-in eyes and greasy long hair down to his shoulders was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I turned around to close the door and saw the man, who was now only a few feet from entering my apartment, the pipe over his head. With less than a second to spare, I slammed the door and locked it in one swift motion. Immediately after, I heard the thud of the pipe hit my door. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed, as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran into Kelsey's room to wake him up. After telling him what exactly had just gone down, he responded by telling me that, yes, he knew a blonde girl named Kaylee, only he had just met her earlier the same day. Apparently, while I was out with my friends, the doorbell rang while Kelsey was home alone. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Kelsey buzzed her up after just hearing her name, thinking she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Felix. Kelsey responded by saying his own name and that no one named Felix lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Kaylee girl or her scumbag partner again. Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 18 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror, anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that it allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Ellie suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Ellie texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Ellie awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream, though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 40 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay and then left to go back to my house, as it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 20 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Ellie was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Ellie and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I had gone over to Ellie's that night, she wasn't asleep at all, she was pretending to be. Evidently, right behind me was a tall, skinny homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Ellie thought she was having an episode when, in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Ellie the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than that I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation. This, in turn, could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. My family and I used to go camping all the time, sometimes more than 3 or 4 times a year, even. We were camping in White Mountain National Forest, and it was our first time doing a more primitive type of camp. Usually, we went to traditional campsites like Yogi Bear Jellystone or even KOA, but this time we were in for something different. I wasn't that excited for it because I didn't think it would be as fun. I think I was 14 when this happened, around that age at least. I was still in an angsty teenage phase, if you will. I was still a good kid, just a little emotional and rough around the edges. When we got there, while my parents were setting up, my little brother and I wanted to do some exploring. We walked around for a while, but we didn't go too far as we didn't know the area and we didn't want to get lost or stray too far from camp. We talked about anything you would imagine 2 unsupervised children would talk about. I started messing with my little brother, Blair, saying things like we were lost and to watch out for the bears and the monsters. Pretty crappy, I know, but I thought it was funny. We messed with each other like that all the time, but I could tell he was actually starting to get scared, so I let him know I was only joking. I was hoping to find a cool bank offshore, like a place we could swim or fish. I found the perfect spot. He ran over to it to investigate it, and I fell in love with the scenery. It truly was beautiful. Our little kid brains loved every second of the outdoors. I knew we had been gone a while, though, and I was in charge of my brother, and I didn't want us to get in trouble. Mom wanted us back before dark anyway, and we were starting to lose daylight. So, we walked back to camp, had dinner, and did our nightly ritual with the family, like playing board games. We had a campfire and all that fun stuff until eventually, it was time for bed. Blair and I were staying in our own tent, while our mom and dad had their own as well. We got our sleeping bags, a lantern, and not much of anything else, maybe some snacks that we snuck into our tent and a DVD player to watch a movie. I fell asleep, but I remember waking up for seemingly no reason in a groggy state of mind. I turned over towards Blair and noticed he was gone. I instantly shot up. I walked out of the tent and saw him walking towards the trail that we came from earlier. "Blair, what are you doing?" I asked. "Get back to sleep before Dad finds out what you're doing." That was when I heard a noise coming from my parents' tent. I worried that I woke them up by basically yelling. I don't know how Blair got out of the tent without me noticing in the first place, but he kept walking until eventually, he was out of my sight. I ended up finding him off the trail a ways, thanks to my lantern, and he was sitting by the lake. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him towards camp when all of a sudden, we saw a shadow. It was a man, and there was something really wrong with him. Like, seriously. He wasn't only just being a creep by staring at us, but he was clearly deranged. He was standing in the moonlight, and I could see him semi-clearly. He had long, dark hair that looked greasy and a creepy mustache. He also had some sort of tool in his hand that looked like a hammer. The way he was just standing there, all crusty looking and staring intensely, showed me enough. He was just sitting there, mouth breathing, and he was extremely pale. He looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I didn't stay for another second or even bother to say a word to him. I mean, come on, I was pretty sure he was a murderer. Now the chase was on. Blair wasn't as fast as me and he could barely keep up. Keep in mind, he was only 9 or 10, so his little legs could only go so fast. I grabbed his arm and practically dragged him to make him go faster. The other problem that we had was we had to get past this man to get back to camp, so we legit had to make a detour and run in a circle around him. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't dark or if we weren't already close to home. We were pretty sure that we lost him and eventually met up with Mom and Dad. They found us out a ways from camp. I guess we were heading in the wrong direction. We kind of got lost in the panic, I guess. You'll never guess what happened after that. When we arrived back at camp, my dad's truck was gone, the only vehicle that we had out there. That man baited us off camp and he stole the truck, broke into our tents, and stole my dad's wallet and phone. Luckily, we had a walkie-talkie to call for help. The police found my dad's truck and actually arrested the man a few days later. What if we would have been out further into the woods that night? That man would have been out further into the woods that night. That man would have caught us, no doubt about it. He chased us through the woods and tried to murder us or kidnap us, one of the two. When my dad got the truck back, unfortunately, it was totaled in a drunk driving incident by the man that stole it. Man, that trip was a nightmare. I work overnight at a warehouse a few miles out from my home. My schedule varies depending on the day, but I'm usually home between 4 and 6 in the morning. I was driving home from my exhausting shift, and all I could think about was getting in bed and passing out. I wasn't falling asleep behind the wheel, but I definitely wasn't fully awake either. I parked on the street in front of my house, walked in through the front door, then walked upstairs and fell into bed. It was one of those days where it just felt so good to be laying down. I was asleep in minutes. When I woke up, I was just as tired, if not more so. I wasn't even sure why I'd woken up in the first place. I rolled over and looked out the window, and it was still dark out, so it had to have been less than an hour since I got in bed. As I began to roll back over to sleep again, I noticed something that made me stop. My bedroom door was open. I stared at it for a good couple of seconds, just so confused by it. I never sleep with my door open, it always makes me feel uncomfortable. Coming home that day was a blur, though, so I couldn't actually remember closing the door, but it was just one of those things I knew I'd always do no matter what. I got up slowly and walked across the room. All the lights were off in the house, but I looked down the hallway outside my room as I closed the door. The second the door clicked, a sound came from the other side of the house. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like something moving for just a couple of seconds, then it stopped. My whole body froze, and I stood there for a minute listening for anything else. The silence was deafening now and only freaked me out more. I took a deep breath and opened the door again. In my head, I still didn't believe this was anything real. I was sure this was just me being scared over nothing, but I still wanted to check just to keep me from overthinking it. I walked across the hallway to the second bedroom, which was where I thought the sound had come from. The room only had a dresser and a bed in it, so there wasn't much to look around. I didn't see anything, so I started walking back until I heard a door in the hallway creaking open. I leaned over and saw a man stepping out of the closet between me and my bedroom. He was looking at me, and in that moment that we made eye contact, I recognized him. I quickly closed and locked the door to the room I was in, and I heard him run down the stairs and out of the house. Of course, I called 911 as soon as I was safe to go back to my room. The police said there were no signs of forced entry, so they said I must have left the front door unlocked. Again, I know I was tired, but that's just something I always do unconsciously, so I don't know if I can believe it. What scares me is that I know I had seen that man from somewhere before, but I have no idea where or when. It could have just been at the grocery store or walking through the city, but it all seems too coincidental. Also, I don't know how long he was inside my house for, but nothing was taken. I know he was likely the one to open my bedroom door while I was sleeping, though, which makes me really uneasy to even think about. He could have done anything or taken anything, but he didn't. Maybe when he opened my bedroom door, he recognized me too and decided not to do what he planned once he saw it was my house. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.